Welcome to a normal part of our culture. The normalization of rough sex is violence, love. This is part two of a 5-part video series on non-fatal strangulation. Here's a pre-warning to this current video. And this is a topic I believe that is incredibly overlooked and underappreciated. It's the red flag, or one of the great red flags of domestic violence that we never discuss. And just want to clarify before we start, again, some victims, they say that they were choked, but the proper legal terminology, they were strangled, strangulation, non-fatal strangulation. Choking, as you know, could be choking on food or choking on a beverage. That's choking, where somebody would give you the Heimlich maneuver, whereas strangulation is a criminal assault. And in average, every 2.6 days, a woman is killed in Canada by a man, often by her current or former intimate partner. We don't need to wait for studies to confirm these numbers. It takes only a few seconds to search the news online to find this information. One such organization is in the UK. It's called We Can't Consent To, and they have a website. And they comment that on the normalization of choking in sex, it's become normalized in our culture. It's become normalized in society. And these Insta tags show thousands of images of sexualized strangulation. Almost exclusively, they show women choked by men. Again, they should use the word strangle. What was once an extreme niche activity is now mainstream in the het sex, and women are frequently assaulted without their say-so. So does Insta normalize and encourage violence against women in sex? Again, strangulation is a dangerous and seriously violent action. It's only correct not to be comfortable doing this someone as a part of sex, even if they ask to. I have never been asked by a man, this is a quote, a testimonial, I have never been asked by a man before he lays his hand on my throat. And the question again is, in our culture, is rough sex on the rise? Again, here's a defensive wound. When someone's being strangled, it's a fight or flight reaction where you'll actually claw to try to get loose from the ligature or from the strangling hands of the perpetrator. And these are self-inflicted defensive wounds by this victim. And again, what happens is the stages of death. That first there's disbelief. You can't believe that this is happening and that their air or blood supply is being stopped. Then there's the stage of realization, where the victim realizes that she thought they're losing air or blood supply. Often the thoughts are of survival, again, fight or flight, and they're thinking of their family, they're thinking of their children. Then it becomes a primal instinct where they'll fight, they'll bite, they'll claw, they'll stab to survive. And the final stage, resignation, where they realize they can't do nothing and that they might actually die. It is thought that strangulation symbolizes the perpetrator's control over the victim and demonstrates the perpetrator's ability to kill the victim. And that's a reference source from this gentleman in 2012. And again, society is actually mocking it or encouraging it. Here's a meme where a man who grabs my throat every time he kisses me, my falling in love with him immediately. The thing is, it seems like they're teaching men that it's the coolest thing to do violence against women. It's the coolest thing to do strangulation. It's not cool. It's a crime. Here's a man in the news currently, Andrew Tate. He was a lightweight kickboxing champion, and then he's was a Twitter celebrity. And Andrew Tate ran a webcam business in the UK, employing 75 women. And actually, he touts himself as a pimp. And again, what business does Andrew Tate have? Well, again, he's a TikTok influencer, runs a webcam scam business, a sex webcam scam business, along with his brother Tristan Tate. And surprisingly, again, that they acted as pimps, but also a money-making scheme that involved rape and organized crime. And he even in his TikTok, he explained the lover boy sex trafficking method. Andrew Tate is accused of using this method to exploit women to get into his sex cam business, which was more than likely a prostitution business, and he was the pimp. A fan once called Andrew Tate the king of toxic masculinity, which is one way to describe a leather jacket wearing guy who, between sexist diatribes, posts photos of himself smoking cigars while posing next to luxury cars and enormous guns. Tate has described in detail how he would attack a woman with a machete if she accused him of cheating. He claims that women belong to men and should not be allowed to drive. Asserted that men can have multiple wives, but women having multiple husbands is disgusting. And he expresses a preference for dating 18 and 19-year-olds because they are more impressionable. We're going to play an audio here of one of the victims of alleged victims of Andrew Tate. Bear with me. We're going to play this for you, audio.
Sally was approached by Andrew when she was 20. Due to fears of harassment from his fan base, she's withholding her real name.
First night that I worked for him, Andrew bought me like 5 bottles of wine. So I got completely drunk because I'd never done webcam work. So I was very, very nervous. Then that night, we were just sitting on the bed and Andrew punched me in my arm. I went to the bathroom and cried. It really, really hurt to have someone just hit me in the arm for no reason. I was very confused. Sorry. Sorry, I don't want to cry.
It's okay.
So then when I came out of the bathroom, he was super, super nice. Like, from what I remember, Andrew didn't have any alcohol at all. It was literally just me. That night we cuddled and we ended up having sex and I was really, really drunk. That was my first night. Then it was kind of like every single night I would work. But as soon as he handed me my money, I soon forgot about him hitting me and everything else. And it was just like, wow, I've got all this money now. Like, he would just pay me a flat fee of £15 an hour, which back then was fantastic. I was making £5 an hour at my 9-to-5 job. But when you look at the money that I was actually bringing in, it just doesn't even scratch the surface.
Were there any other instances where there was physical abuse?
Yeah, so when we moved into the bigger apartment, that's when more girls started coming into the apartment to work for Andrew. And that's when I just witnessed so much, like, verbal, physical, not just to me, but the other women involved. And it just got worse over time. Andrew would call us lazy hoes. I saw him smack girls with a belt because she wanted a lion. He used to strangle us as well.
So that's what pimps do. They beat the women down till they break their will, and they threaten violence. And this Andrew Tate is supposed to be a role model for younger men and a mentor for younger men, and certainly is not a good mentor and is not a good role model. And again, this is a quote from Andrew, that you then grip her by her neck. And this is Tate's opinion on how to handle a woman. And just a disgusting human being. He's been arrested twice for human trafficking, and he's gotten off being released from the police. Moving on to a different topic. Again, the fatal, hateful rise of choking during sex. Too many women's lives are ending after what those accused of their deaths say were sex games gone wrong. So when they went to court, that was the defense. The defense was, oh, it was a sex game that went wrong. And the question is, how did strangling ever become normalized? Here's another heading of a newspaper. Kinky sex too early in a relationship isn't just a mistake, it's an assault. Here's another testimonial. Yeah, I was married to a man that was violent and eventually tried to choke me to death. I was encouraged by a female pastor to pray him into the church out of the streets. The night that he straddled me with both of my arms by my side as he choked me, I quietly prayed and told God that it looks like he is going to kill me this time and to please take care of my 3 kids. I heard my bones cracking in my neck and I felt my eyes bulging. Again, repeating that, I heard my bones cracking in my neck. I felt my eyes bulging out of my head as he tightened his grip. After praying that prayer, he immediately had a crazy look on his face as he jumped off of me and ran out of the house. To this day, I don't know what he said when he looked at me as he choked me, but it scared him to death. Another testimonial. She says, his eyes looked like the devil. He jumped on top of me, pushing my head down to the ground with one hand. Once on the ground, he put both hands around my neck. He was sitting on my stomach and had all of his weight on my neck. Nina says that on a scale of 0 to 10, the pressure on her neck was a 10. She could not breathe or speak. She began to see floating lights. She says he was yelling at me, but I could not hear what he was saying to me. She says she was trying to pull his fingers off her neck, but she could not move them. She believes he was holding her neck for about 20 seconds. Nina begins to cry and says, I thought that I would never see my children and my family again. I thought he was going to kill me. Fortunately, there was ample evidence to speak for Vicky. The pathology report showed her injuries could not have been inflicted by a dressing gown cord, and the force that was used was excessive. Roberts had snapped a hyoid bone in the front of her neck. He hadn't called an ambulance. He hid Vicky's body in the garage and told her family she had left him for another man. His phone showed that he had been conducting affairs with at least 3 other women, calling one of them constantly on the night in question. This is from a court case. Just 1 month after the trial, another woman, Michelle Stonall, was found strangled with her dog's leash in Shelton County Park, Birmingham. Her killer used the same sex game defense, that it was a sex game that had went wrong. So again, this organization in the UK, because of all these incidents happening, they started an organization called We Can't Consent to This.uk. And this was a response to the increasing use of rough sex as a defense, that it was a sex game that had went wrong, in the killing or violent injury of women and girls. So this organization came to bring this to the attention that it's a very poor legal defense to say that it was a sex game that had went wrong. And this is a response to the increasing use of rough sex defenses to the killing or violent injury of women and girls. There are at least 60 UK women that were killed and many were injured. We're extremely concerned by normalized violence against women with sex. So rough sex, the government finally passed legislation, not only in the UK, but also in Canada, that rough sex as a defense will be banned. And so the Minister of Justice said again that this legal defense will no longer be allowed in court. And again, this is the physical violence, sexual wheel of power and control that men that commit these crimes use. They're using coercion and threats. They're using intimidation. They're using emotional abuse. They're using isolation. They're minimizing, denying, and blaming. They're using children. They're using male privilege. They're using economic abuse. And again, these are all the different possibilities of chokeholds using hands and the arm. And they'll often say as a defense, it started out consensual, and then I got really scared because I couldn't breathe, but I couldn't stop the situation. And what's happening in society is that extreme pornography or extreme porn is rewiring boys' brains to sanction this rape and strangulation culture. And again, this organization we can't consent to. They had an article that explores the potential link between pornography and the rise of normalization of choking. And again, in that article, that's what they said. This is a repeat slide from earlier. They said that strangulation is dangerous. It's a seriously violent action. And it's totally correct not to feel comfortable doing this to someone as a part of sex, even if they ask to. It's interesting how more and more women are experiencing being choked, strangled by men with no warning or consent. It's almost like more men are believing what you said and thinking that they don't have to ask because women are supposed to like it or be willing to do it. And we've got a lot of upcoming what we call clinical pearls or apples of gold of knowledge. Strangulation is an ultimate form of power and control because the batterer demonstrates his command over the victim's breath. Another apple of gold clinical pearl. Women who suffer one non-fatal strangulation by an intimate partner are 750% more likely to be killed with a gun by that same person. The majority of strangulation attacks do not leave any visible external injuries on the victim. And strangulation is a lethal form of assault with a variety of hypoxic and anoxic symptoms necessitating careful history taking and documentation at the emergency department of the hospital or by the paramedics. The association between strangulation and other lethal criminal acts is clear. And in the United States, many of the states have increased penalties on conviction when strangulation is clearly documented in the medical records. Strangulation is a gendered crime. Most stranglers are men, over 90%, and most victims are women. The cost of misreporting or misunderstanding strangulation crimes is incredibly high because strangulation frequently foreshadows an escalating use of violence and homicides. During a strangulation event, loss of consciousness can occur within 5 to 10 seconds, and death can occur within minutes. So when domestic violence perpetrators strangle their victims, not only is this a felonious assault or possibly an attempted murder, but too often it can lead to a fatal outcome. 97% of strangulation victims are strangled manually by hands. Here's an interesting thing of strangulation. I can't pronounce this, forgive me. Incapretamento, and that's the mafia. The homicidal strangulation typically of the Italian mafia, in which the victim is obligated in a modified hog-tie position with the wrists and the ankles tethered together behind the victim's back, the body in the prone position, and an additional ligature encircling the neck attached to the bindings of the extremities. And here's a reference from the American Forensics Medical Pathology Journal. And so this is what happens. The mafia, they're sending a signal to their enemies, but to know that strangulation is such a heinous crime that it's even used by the mafia for killing people, that speaks truckloads. Here's some Canadian content. CBC did an article specifically on the East Coast, Newfoundland and Labrador, that strangulation, the underestimated assault in domestic violence. And this reporter for CBC, Glenn Payette, in June 20th, 2018, he said that 30 to 70% of women who are victims of domestic violence have been strangled. Here's a nurse in Edmonton, Morag McLean. She specializes with victims of violence and teaches about the risks of strangulation. Here's another Canadian content, CBC Kitchener-Waterloo, announcing that the Canadian government has given a new strangulation law that targets domestic violence, with more than 200 charges recently laid in that community related to this strangulation law. So in 2019, the Criminal Code of Canada made an amendment and added strangulation as a separate offense. And in 2019, the Criminal Code Section 267, which addresses assault with a weapon or causing bodily harm, was amended to include an additional offense that factors in choking, suffocation, or strangulation. If convicted, an offender could face imprisonment up to 10 years. And also in the Criminal Code of Canada, Section 272, which addresses sexual assault, also had a subsection added factoring in a similar offense related to strangulation. But even when these cases go to court, there's a lot of minimizations. For example, don't expect your judges or jurors to understand the seriousness of strangulation. And without an expert witness, the jurors are likely to think it didn't happen because the injuries were too minor. And the jurors wanted to know why that it was only prosecuted as a misdemeanor. Other things that are minimization is by the offenders themselves. They'll say, "Why are you arresting me? All I did was choke her." "Officer, I swear I didn't do it. All I did was choke the living out of her once or twice. I swear I didn't hit her." The minimization by professionals, the dispatch operators may not realize the danger and trivialize the violence. The minimization by the victims. Most victims may be reluctant to seek medical attention because they don't understand the dangers of strangulation. Quote unquote by a victim, "He didn't really choke me, he just had me in a headlock and I couldn't breathe." And the problem is, whose job is it to call the paramedics? It's our job to call the paramedics. Common feelings and experiences. Some of the victims are going to feel betrayal. How could someone I loved and considered a partner do something like that to me? I was looking at his eyes and he looked crazy. It was like he was possessed. The victims are going to also feel feelings of disbelief. I can't believe this could happen to me. They're going to feel vulnerability. I thought I was going to die. I felt hopelessness. And again, a repetition of a fact, and that's how we learn. Non-fatal, non-consensual strangulation increases the risk of homicide by 700%. It's one of the most lethal forms of violence. So the average time to go unconsciousness, 7 to 10 seconds. 15 seconds of strangulation can lead to brain infarct, a stroke. 1 to 30 seconds can lead to cardiac arrest. And 4 to 5 minutes of strangulation, brain dead. And again, the modes of death are either going to be coma, syncope, or asphyxia. Coma being death from failure of functioning of the brain. Syncope, death from the failure of functioning of the heart. Asphyxia, death from the functioning of the lungs. So common causes for delayed death, the lung inflammation due to breathing in contents of stomach after vomiting, fracture of the trachea or larynx with an air leak, airway obstruction due to swelling of the glottis or larynx, and a stroke from blood clot caused by the carotid artery or dissection, separation of layers of the artery. That's what's called a carotid artery dissection. In our upcoming video, part 3, we're actually going to discuss all the anatomy of this situation so that you'll better understand the anatomy. In our response to the victims, we need to have enhanced screening. We need to have enhanced evidence collection by first responders and law enforcement. And again, only 39% of the victims report it to the law enforcement. We need to have enhanced education to victims by first responders, law enforcement, and domestic programs. And again, we're headed way in the right direction to have heightened prosecution of the crime. And again, a repeat slide, the stages of death, the disbelief, the realization, the primal reaction, and finally the surrender, the resignation. So I appreciate you watching this video this evening. It's January the 8th, 2023 from Niagara Falls, Canada. Thank you, and hopefully if you have any questions, it's jamesfrizzell983@gmail.com. Thank you.